Let us begin with the most fundamental questions of all. What is real? What am I? These questions have occupied philosophers for thousands of years, and tonight we'll explore them together in the quiet darkness. Imagine for a moment that reality might be made of one fundamental substance, or perhaps two. This is the ancient debate between monism and dualism. Monism suggests that everything in existence, from the hardest rock to the softest thought, is ultimately made of the same essential substance. Perhaps everything is matter, physical and measurable. Or perhaps everything is mind, consciousness experiencing itself. Dualism, on the other hand, proposes that there are two fundamentally different kinds of things, the mental and the physical. Your thoughts and your body existing in separate realms yet somehow interacting. This leads us naturally to the mind-body problem, one of the most persistent puzzles in all of philosophy. How does your mind, with its thoughts and feelings and dreams, interact with your physical body? When you decide to raise your arm, something mental, an intention, causes something physical to happen. But how? If mind and body are truly different substances, how do they communicate across this seemingly impossible divide? It's like asking how a ghost might move a stone. The question has troubled thinkers from Descartes to modern neuroscientists. Within this puzzle lies an even deeper mystery, what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness. Why does the physical activity in your brain, neurons firing in intricate patterns, produce the rich, subjective experience of being you? Science can explain many things about the brain. We can map which regions light up when you see red, or taste chocolate, or remember your childhood. But why does any of this feel like something? Why isn't it all just computation in the dark, without any inner experience at all? This is the hard problem. Not how the brain works, but why there is something it is like to be you, experiencing your life from the inside. Consider for a moment the peculiar philosophy of solipsism. It suggests that the only thing you can be truly certain of is your own mind. Everything else, every other person, every tree and mountain, every star in the sky, might be nothing more than ideas in your consciousness. You cannot step outside your own experience to verify that anything else truly exists. Of course, most of us don't believe this. We act as if other people are real, as if the world continues when we're not looking. But solipsism reminds us of something important. All of our knowledge comes through the filter of our own consciousness. We never experience the world directly, only our mind's representation of it. There's a principle called the identity of indiscernibles, which states that if two things share all the same properties in every possible way, then they are not two things at all, but the same thing. This seems obvious at first, but it raises fascinating questions. Could there be two identical particles in the universe, exactly the same in every way? If so, what makes them two rather than one? If not, what differs between them? The principle suggests that to be a distinct individual thing, you must have at least some property that distinguishes you from everything else. This brings us to the ancient paradox of the ship of Theseus. Imagine a wooden ship that sails the seas for years. Over time, planks rot and are replaced, one by one. Eventually, every single piece of the original ship has been replaced. Is it still the same ship? Most of us would say yes. But now imagine that someone collected all the original planks and rebuilt them into a ship. Which one is the real ship of Theseus? The one that's been continuously sailing, or the one made of all the original parts? This paradox asks us to consider what makes something the same thing over time. Is it continuity of form and function, or continuity of physical material? The question applies to everything, including you. Your cells are constantly being replaced. Are you the same person you were 7 years ago when most of your cells were different? Some philosophers have taken an extreme position on questions of parts and wholes. Mereological nihilism is the view that composite objects made of parts, don't really exist at all. According to this view, there are only fundamental particles arranged in various patterns. There is no such thing as a table, only particles arranged table-wise. There is no such thing as you, only particles arranged person-wise. At first, this seems absurd, but the mereological nihilist would say that our common-sense objects are just convenient fictions, useful ways of talking about complex arrangements of particles. The only things that truly exist are the fundamental building blocks and the spatial relations between them. One of the most profound debates in philosophy concerns whether we have free will. Determinism is the view that everything that happens is the inevitable result of prior causes. If you know the complete state of the universe at one moment and all the laws of physics, you could in principle calculate everything that will ever happen. This includes every thought you'll have and every decision you'll make. If determinism is true, then when you chose what to eat for breakfast this morning, you couldn't have chosen otherwise. The choice was determined by your brain state, which was determined by prior causes, stretching back to the beginning of time. You feel free, but this feeling might be an illusion. But perhaps free will and determinism can coexist. This is the position of compatibilism, which argues that even in a deterministic universe, we can meaningfully be said to have free will. What matters is not whether your actions are determined, but whether they flow from your own desires, beliefs, and character. You are free when you do what you want to do, even if what you want is itself determined. A prisoner in chains is not free, but not because determinism is true. He's not free because external constraints prevent him from acting on his desires. Compatibilism tries to preserve moral responsibility in a potentially deterministic universe by redefining what we mean by freedom. Let us turn now to the nature of time itself. Do the past and future exist, or is there only the present moment? Presentism says that only the present is real. The past was real, but is no more. The future will be real, but is not yet. Right now, this very moment as you listen to these words, is all that exists. But eternalism, also called the block universe theory, says something very different. According to eternalism, the past, present, and future all exist equally. Time is like space. Just as distant places exist even though you're not there, distant times exist even though you're not then. Yesterday and tomorrow are just as real as today. You simply happen to be located at this particular moment in time. From this view, the flow of time is an illusion of consciousness. The entire history of the universe, from the Big Bang to its ultimate end, exists as a single four-dimensional block. And your experience of moving through time is merely your consciousness encountering different slices of this unchanging reality. In recent decades, a provocative idea has captured public imagination: the simulation hypothesis. What if our entire reality is a sophisticated computer simulation created by some advanced civilization? The beings running the simulation might be in a real universe, or they might themselves be in a simulation, leading to simulations within simulations, turtles all the way down. If the simulation is detailed enough, we would have no way to tell. Every scientific experiment, every observation, every memory you have could be programmed. Some philosophers and scientists take this possibility seriously, arguing that if civilizations capable of creating such simulations are possible, and if they would want to create many such simulations, then statistically speaking, we are more likely to be in a simulation than in base reality. It's a modern version of ancient skeptical scenarios, updated for the digital age. Consider the possibility of panpsychism, the view that consciousness is not something that mysteriously emerges from complex arrangements of matter, but rather is a fundamental feature of all matter. According to panpsychism, even electrons have some primitive form of experience. Consciousness is not something that appears suddenly when you reach a certain level of neural complexity. Instead, it's been there all along, woven into the fabric of reality. The consciousness you experience is perhaps the combined, integrated experience of trillions of smaller conscious entities. This might sound strange, but some philosophers argue it solves the hard problem of consciousness. If matter is conscious by nature, we don't need to explain how consciousness emerges from non-conscious matter. The mystery is dissolved. The extended mind hypothesis suggests that your mind is not confined to your brain, or even to your body. When you use a notebook to remember things, that notebook becomes part of your cognitive system. When you use your smartphone to navigate, it becomes part of your mind. The boundaries of the self are not fixed at the skin or skull, but extend into the world through tools and technologies. This challenges our intuitive notion that the mind is something that happens entirely inside the head. Instead, cognition is distributed across brain, body, and world. There's a criticism of how we think about consciousness called the Cartesian theatre, named after Descartes. It's the mistaken idea that somewhere in the brain there's a central place where consciousness happens, like a theatre where all sensory information is projected, and a little person, a homunculus, sits and watches. Of course, this can't be right, because then we'd need to explain the consciousness of the homunculus, leading to an infinite regress of tiny people watching theatres in their heads. Instead, consciousness seems to be distributed across many brain processes happening simultaneously. There's no single place where it all comes together, and yet you experience yourself as a unified consciousness. How this unity arises from distributed processes is another deep mystery. The philosopher John Searle proposed biological naturalism, the view that consciousness is a biological phenomenon, like digestion or photosynthesis. It's caused by specific neurobiological processes in the brain, and it's irreducible to something else. You can't explain consciousness away as an illusion or as something non-physical. It's a real, physical, biological feature of certain organisms. But unlike other physical phenomena, consciousness is subjective and experiential. Searle argues we need to expand our understanding of what counts as physical to include subjective, first-person experiences. Consciousness is as real as rocks and trees, but it's real in a different way, from the inside. Let's contemplate hyperobjects, entities so vast in space and time that they transcend ordinary human perception and understanding. Climate change is a hyperobject. It's happening everywhere and nowhere, affecting everything yet invisible in any single moment or place. You can't point to climate change the way you point to a tree. You can only see its effects, traces, symptoms. Hyperobjects challenge our ability to think and act because human cognition evolved to deal with objects at human scale. When faced with something so large and long-lasting that it encompasses our entire civilization, our intuitions fail us. We struggle to grasp hyperobjects emotionally and intellectually, even when we understand them abstractly. Here's a strange idea from physics and probability. Boltzmann brains. In an infinite or sufficiently old universe, random quantum fluctuations could spontaneously assemble a functioning human brain, complete with memories of a life that never happened. This brain would exist for a brief moment before dissipating back into chaos. The disturbing part is that, according to some calculations, such randomly assembled brains should be vastly more common than brains that evolved gradually through the history of life on Earth. If this is true, you should be more likely to be a Boltzmann brain than a real evolved human. The fact that you seem to have a consistent past and live in a lawful universe is evidence against this. But it's still a troubling paradox about probability and the nature of consciousness. The theory of knowledge. Now let us turn to epistemology, the study of knowledge itself. How do we know what we know? Can we be certain of anything? These questions have driven philosophy since ancient times. Plato's allegory of the cave is one of the most famous images in philosophy. Imagine prisoners chained in a cave since childhood, facing a wall. Behind them burns a fire, and between the fire and the prisoners, people carry objects that cast shadows on the wall. The prisoners see only these shadows and believe them to be reality. If a prisoner were freed and turned around, the fire would hurt his eyes. If dragged out of the cave into sunlight, he would be blinded and confused. Only gradually would he adjust and see the real world, eventually even looking at the sun itself, the source of all light and truth. If he returned to tell the others, they would think him mad and might even kill him for suggesting their reality is false. This allegory represents the philosopher's journey from ignorance to knowledge, from the shadows of appearance to the light of truth. Most people live their entire lives seeing only shadows, mistaking appearance for reality. Descartes gave us one of philosophy's most famous statements: "I think, therefore I am," the cogito. Descartes was pursuing radical doubt, trying to find something he could be absolutely certain of. He could doubt his senses, they sometimes deceive him. He could doubt mathematics. Perhaps an evil demon was making him believe 2 + 2 = 4 when it doesn't. He could doubt that he has a body. Perhaps it's all a dream. But one thing he couldn't doubt, that he was doubting. And to doubt is to think. And to think, something must exist to do the thinking. Even if everything else is false. Even if he's being completely deceived. The fact that he's being deceived means he must exist. The act of thinking proves the existence of a thinking thing. This became Descartes' foundation for rebuilding knowledge from the ground up. For a long time, philosophers defined knowledge as justified true belief. If you believe something, your belief is true, and you have good justification for believing it, then you know it. This seemed correct until Edmund Gettier published a short paper in 1963 presenting cases where someone has justified true belief but clearly doesn't have knowledge. For example, imagine you look at a clock and form the belief that it's 3 o'clock. The clock says 3 o'clock, and it actually is 3 o'clock, so your belief is true. And you're justified in believing it, because reading a clock is a reliable way to tell time. But unbeknownst to you, the clock stopped exactly 12 hours ago. You have justified true belief, but do you really know what time it is? Gettier's problem shows that knowledge requires something more than justified true belief, but philosophers still debate what that something more might be. The problem of the criterion is a circular puzzle about the foundations of knowledge. To know whether something is true, you need a criterion, a standard or method for determining truth. But how do you know your criterion is reliable? You'd need some way to test it, which requires another criterion. But then how do you justify that criterion? This leads either to infinite regress, needing an endless series of criteria to justify criteria, or to circular reasoning, where you use your criterion to justify itself, or to arbitrarily assuming some criterion without justification. This problem suggests that knowledge might not have secure foundations at all, that at some level, we simply must make assumptions we cannot fully justify. Skepticism takes seriously the possibility that we cannot have certain knowledge about the world. Ancient skeptics argued that for any claim, equally good arguments could be made for and against it, leading to suspension of judgment. Modern skeptics point out that all our knowledge of the external world comes through our senses, which are fallible. We know we sometimes hallucinate or dream. How can we be certain we're not hallucinating or dreaming right now? We have no way to step outside our experience to check whether it matches reality. This doesn't mean skeptics believe nothing. Rather, they question whether we can have the kind of absolute certainty we often claim to have. Descartes' evil demon hypothesis is a radical skeptical scenario. Imagine an immensely powerful evil demon who has made it his purpose to deceive you about everything. He makes you think you have a body when you don't. He makes you think there's a world around you when there isn't. He deceives you about mathematics, about logic, about everything. In such a scenario, almost everything you believe would be false. The evil demon is similar to the modern simulation hypothesis, just phrased in terms of 17th century theology rather than 21st century technology. Both scenarios illustrate how difficult it is to achieve certainty about anything beyond your own existence and experiences. The Munchausen trilemma, named after the fictional Baron von Munchausen, who pulled himself up by his own hair, is a problem about justification. Whenever you justify a belief, you give reasons for it. But those reasons need justification too, and the justification for those reasons needs justification. This leads to 3 unsatisfactory options: infinite regress, where you need an endless chain of justifications; circular reasoning, where you eventually justify beliefs by appealing to themselves; or dogmatism, where you simply stop at some beliefs and declare them foundational without further justification. All three options are problematic, yet these seem to be the only possibilities. This trilemma suggests that absolute justification might be impossible, that at some level knowledge rests on assumptions we cannot fully justify. David Hume identified what's called the is-ought problem, or Hume's guillotine. You cannot logically derive an ought from an is. No matter how many facts you observe about the world, you cannot logically conclude what you should do without adding some evaluative premise. Science tells us what is the case. Ethics tells us what ought to be. They're separate domains, and you can't derive one from the other through logic alone. This creates a puzzle about how we justify moral claims. If they're not based on facts about the world, what are they based on? Hume thought moral judgments are based on sentiments, feelings of approval and disapproval, rather than reason. But this view faces its own challenges. Hedonism is the view that pleasure is the only intrinsic good and pain the only intrinsic evil. Everything else we value only as a means to pleasure. Health, friendship, knowledge, all are good, only because they bring pleasure. This might sound plausible at first. Don't we ultimately do everything to be happy? But hedonism faces objections. It seems to reduce the rich variety of human values to a single dimension. And it's not clear that we only value pleasure. Many would choose a meaningful but difficult life over a pleasant but meaningless one. Robert Nozick challenged hedonism with the experience machine thought experiment. Imagine a machine that can give you any experiences you want. You can program it to make you feel like you're writing a great novel, making new friends, achieving your goals. While in the machine, you won't know it's not real. Would you plug in for life? Most people say no. But if pleasure is all that matters, we should plug in. The fact that we wouldn't suggest we value more than just pleasant experiences. We value actually doing things, being certain kinds of people, connecting with reality. Nozick argued that hedonism cannot account for these values. Metaethics is the study of the nature of ethical language and thought itself. Rather than asking what's right or wrong, metaethics asks what we mean when we make moral judgments. Are moral statements true or false? Do they describe objective features of reality, or do they express subjective attitudes? When you say murder is wrong, are you stating a fact, or expressing disapproval, or prescribing a rule, or something else? Metaethics also asks whether moral knowledge is possible, and how moral terms get their meaning. These abstract questions underlie more practical ethical debates. G.E. Moore identified what he called the naturalistic fallacy, the supposed error of defining good in terms of natural properties. If you say good means pleasure, or evolutionary fitness, or what most people approve of, Moore argued you're making a mistake. Good is a simple, indefinable property, like the color yellow. You can point to things that have it, but you can't define it in other terms. Any attempt to do so leaves open the question, but is that actually good? This has been influential but also controversial, with philosophers debating whether Moore was right about the indefinability of good. Moore's open question argument supports his claim that good is indefinable. Take any proposed definition, say good means pleasant. Now ask, I know this is pleasant, but is it good? This is an open question, one that makes sense to ask. But if good really meant pleasant, this question wouldn't make sense. It would be like asking, I know this is a bachelor, but is he unmarried? Which is silly because bachelor means unmarried man. Since I know this is pleasant, but is it good? Is a sensible question. Good cannot mean pleasant. This argument has been applied to reject all naturalistic definitions of good, though critics question whether it really works. Moral dumbfounding occurs when people have strong moral intuitions, but cannot provide rational justifications for them. In experiments, people might strongly condemn an action, say consensual incest between siblings who use protection, but be unable to explain why it's wrong. They just feel it's wrong. This suggests that moral judgment might be more emotional than rational, more intuitive than deliberative. We make moral judgments quickly and automatically, then confabulate reasons afterward. This challenges traditional views of ethics as based on reason and raises questions about the reliability of moral intuitions. The problem of dirty hands is a moral dilemma faced especially by political leaders. Sometimes doing the right thing overall requires doing something wrong. To prevent a terrorist attack, should a politician authorize torture? To win a just war, should a leader order bombings that will kill civilians? If you refuse to dirty your hands, you maintain your moral purity but allow greater harm. If you do what's necessary, you save lives but commit an immoral act. This problem suggests that moral life, especially in politics, sometimes involves tragic choices where you cannot avoid doing wrong. You might be justified in choosing the lesser evil, but it remains evil and you bear moral responsibility for it. Deontic logic is the formal study of obligation, permission, and prohibition. Just as regular logic studies the relationships between true and false, deontic logic studies the relationships between obligatory, permissible, and forbidden. If something is obligatory, then not doing it is forbidden. If something is permissible, then it's not forbidden. These logical relationships help clarify moral reasoning. But deontic logic also reveals paradoxes. For example, if you ought to do A and you ought to do B, does it follow that you ought to do both A and B? What if they're incompatible? Deontic logic provides tools for thinking rigorously about ethics, but also shows how complex moral reasoning can be. The debate between egoism and altruism concerns whether humans are fundamentally self-interested or capable of genuine concern for others. Psychological egoism claims that all human actions are ultimately motivated by self-interest, even apparently selfless acts. When you help someone, you do it because it makes you feel good, or because you hope for future reciprocation, or to avoid guilt. Psychological altruism counters that we can be genuinely motivated by concern for others' welfare, independent of our own benefit. Ethical egoism is the normative view that we ought to act in our own self-interest. Ethical altruism says we ought to consider others' interests, perhaps even putting them before our own. These debates about the nature and value of self-interest versus concern for others run through ethics and political philosophy, logic and paradoxes. Philosophy has always been fascinated by paradoxes, seemingly logical arguments that lead to contradictions or absurdities. Let's explore some of these puzzles that challenge our thinking. The liar paradox is one of the oldest logical puzzles. Consider the sentence, "This statement is false. If it's true, then it's false, as it claims to be. But if it's false, then it's true, since it correctly states that it's false." Either way, we have a contradiction. The liar paradox is not just a curiosity, it reveals deep problems about self-reference and truth. Similar paradoxes appear in mathematics and have forced logicians to carefully restrict the kinds of self-reference allowed in formal systems. The Sorit's paradox, also called the paradox of the heap, challenges our understanding of vague concepts. A single grain of sand is not a heap. Adding one more grain still doesn't make a heap. If you keep adding grains one at a time, at what point does it become a heap? There seems to be no definite answer, yet clearly, 1,000,000 grains of sand do form a heap. The paradox shows that our ordinary concepts are often vague, without sharp boundaries. This causes problems for logic, which usually assumes statements are clearly true or false. The Sorit's paradox applies to many concepts. When does a person become bald? When does a color stop being red and start being orange? When does a collection of things become many rather than few? Zeno's paradoxes are ancient arguments suggesting that motion is impossible. The most famous is the paradox of Achilles and the tortoise. Achilles races a tortoise who has a head start. To catch the tortoise, Achilles must first reach where the tortoise started, but by then, the tortoise has moved ahead. Achilles must reach this new position, but again the tortoise has moved. This continues infinitely. Achilles must complete an infinite number of tasks to catch the tortoise, which seems impossible. Yet we see people overtake each other constantly. Zeno's paradoxes troubled philosophers for millennia. Modern mathematics, with its concept of infinite series that converge to finite values, provides a response. An infinite number of smaller and smaller steps can add up to a finite distance. But some philosophers argue this mathematical solution misses Zeno's deeper point about the nature of continuity and infinity. Russell's paradox shook the foundations of mathematics in the early 20th century. Consider the set of all sets that do not contain themselves. Most sets don't contain themselves. The set of all cats is not itself a cat, so it doesn't contain itself. Now, does the set of all sets that don't contain themselves contain itself? If it does, then by definition it shouldn't. If it doesn't, then by definition it should. Contradiction. This paradox revealed that naive set theory was inconsistent. Mathematicians had to develop more careful formulations to avoid such contradictions. Russell's paradox shows how self-reference can create logical problems even in seemingly rigorous mathematical contexts. Buridan's ass is a paradox about rational decision-making. A donkey stands exactly between two identical piles of hay, equidistant and equally appealing. The donkey has no reason to choose one over the other. Being perfectly rational, it cannot decide and starves to death. The paradox illustrates a problem with purely rational decision-making. When options are exactly equal, rationality provides no guidance, yet some choice must be made. Real agents deal with this by introducing some randomness or arbitrary preference. But this suggests that pure rationality is insufficient for action in the world. The paradox of choice suggests that having too many options can lead to anxiety and dissatisfaction. You might think more choices are always better, allowing you to find exactly what you want. But psychological research shows that too many options can be paralyzing. You spend so much time weighing options that you never decide. Or you make a decision but second-guess it, wondering if one of the other options would have been better. With fewer choices, deciding is easier and satisfaction is often higher. This paradox has implications for how we design markets, institutions, and even our personal lives. Freedom to choose is valuable, but unlimited choice can become oppressive. Karl Popper identified the paradox of tolerance. A tolerant society tolerates different views and ways of life. But what should it do about intolerance? If we tolerate intolerant movements, they may grow powerful and destroy tolerance itself. But if we don't tolerate intolerance, we're being intolerant, contradicting our commitment to tolerance. Popper's resolution was that a tolerant society should tolerate everything except intolerance itself. When intolerance threatens to violently overthrow tolerance, tolerance must defend itself, even if this means being intolerant toward the intolerant. This paradox remains relevant in debates about free speech, hate speech, and the limits of pluralism. The paradox of omnipotence asks, can an omnipotent being create a rock so heavy that it cannot lift it? If it can create such a rock, then there's something it cannot do, namely lift the rock, so it's not omnipotent. If it cannot create such a rock, then there's something it cannot do, namely create the rock, so it's not omnipotent. Either way, omnipotence seems impossible. Various solutions have been proposed. Some say omnipotence means being able to do anything logically possible, and creating a rock an omnipotent being can't lift is logically impossible, like making a square circle. Others argue the paradox trades on an equivocation, shifting between different senses of can. But the paradox continues to puzzle philosophers and theologians. The lottery fallacy involves mistakenly believing that a specific improbable event is impossible. In a fair lottery with 1 million tickets, the chance that any specific ticket wins is 1 in 1 million, extremely unlikely. So you might believe your ticket won't win, and that's rational, but someone's ticket must win. The fallacy is thinking that because each specific outcome is unlikely, all outcomes are unlikely, or that the most likely outcome is that no one wins. This fallacy appears in many contexts. Each specific arrangement of atoms is incredibly unlikely, yet matter must be arranged somehow. The fallacy confuses the improbability of a specific outcome with the improbability of any outcome. Moore's paradox concerns statements like, "It's raining, but I don't believe it's raining." This can be true. It might actually be raining while you mistakenly believe it isn't. So the statement isn't a logical contradiction. Yet it's absurd to assert it. If you assert that it's raining, you express your belief that it's raining, which contradicts the second part of your assertion. Moore's paradox shows a difference between what can be true and what can be rationally asserted. The paradox has implications for understanding belief, assertion, and the first-person perspective. It reveals something about the special relationship we have to our own beliefs. Occam's razor is a principle of theoretical parsimony attributed to William of Ockham. It states that, all else being equal, simpler explanations are better than complex ones. If two theories explain the data equally well, prefer the one that makes fewer assumptions or posits fewer entities. This principle guides scientific theorizing and everyday reasoning. But why should reality be simple? There's no guarantee that the universe operates according to simple principles. Some defend Occam's razor pragmatically. Simpler theories are easier to test and work with. Others defend it probabilistically. Simpler theories make fewer specific claims, so they're less likely to be wrong. But Occam's razor remains a heuristic rather than an absolute rule. Political and social philosophy. Let us explore how philosophy addresses questions of justice, society, and political organization. How should we live together? What makes a society just? Social contract theory imagines society as based on an implicit agreement among individuals. In the state of nature, without government or law, life would be difficult or impossible. So people agree to form a society, surrendering some freedoms in exchange for security and cooperation. Different philosophers describe this contract differently. Hobbes thought people need a powerful sovereign to prevent violent chaos. Locke thought people agree to government to protect natural rights to life, liberty, and property. Rousseau thought the social contract creates a general will that represents the common good. Modern philosophers debate whether we can be bound by a contract we never explicitly agreed to. But the social contract idea remains influential, suggesting that political authority requires some form of consent and that government exists to serve the people. John Rawls proposed the veil of ignorance as a method for determining just principles for society. Imagine you're choosing the rules for society, but you don't know what position you'll occupy in it. You don't know if you'll be rich or poor, talented or disabled, privileged or oppressed. Behind this veil of ignorance, what principles would you choose? Rawls argued you'd choose principles that protect the worst off, since you might be one of them. You'd want equal basic liberties for all, and inequalities in wealth and power, only if they benefit the least advantaged. The veil of ignorance is meant to ensure fairness by removing bias. If you might be anyone in society, you'll choose principles that are fair to everyone. Critics debate whether Rawls's specific conclusions follow from this method, but the veil of ignorance has become a standard tool for thinking about justice. The free rider problem occurs when individuals can benefit from a common resource or public good without contributing to it. If a community benefits from clean air but pollution controls are costly, each individual might reason, if everyone else reduces pollution, I can benefit without paying the cost. If no one else reduces pollution, my contribution won't make a difference anyway. If everyone reasons this way, no one contributes and everyone suffers. The free rider problem explains why public goods are underprovided without some mechanism, like government enforcement, to ensure contribution. It applies to everything from national defense to public broadcasting to environmental protection. The challenge is getting people to cooperate when individual interest suggests defecting. The tragedy of the commons is similar, but focuses on overuse rather than underuse. When a resource is shared but unregulated, individuals have incentive to overexploit it. Consider a common grazing field. Each herder benefits by adding more animals, but the cost of overgrazing is spread across all herders. So each adds more animals, beyond what the land can sustain. Eventually, the commons is destroyed, harming everyone. This tragedy occurs with ocean fisheries, forests, aquifers, and the atmosphere. The solution usually involves either privatization, giving individuals ownership and incentive to conserve, or regulation, with rules enforced by authority. The Tragedy of the Commons shows how individually rational actions can lead to collectively disastrous outcomes. Karl Marx's dialectical materialism is a theory of historical development. Marx argued that history progresses through material and economic forces, specifically class struggle. Society is divided into classes based on their relationship to the means of production. In feudalism, lords owned land and serfs worked it. In capitalism, the bourgeoisie own factories and the proletariat sell their labor. Each economic system contains internal contradictions that lead to its transformation. Capitalism creates massive productive capacity, but also inequality and exploitation. These contradictions will lead to revolution and socialism, where workers control the means of production. Marx saw this as a scientific prediction, not just a moral ideal. History moves through dialectical progression, thesis generating antithesis, generating synthesis. While Marx's specific predictions haven't been borne out, his ideas about economic forces shaping society remain influential. Existentialism. Now let us turn to questions of meaning, purpose, and how to live in a universe that may offer no inherent answers to these questions. These are among the most personal and pressing questions in philosophy. Existential angst is the deep anxiety that arises from confronting the fundamental facts of human existence. You are radically free. There's no predetermined essence or purpose to your life. You must create meaning through your choices, but there's no guarantee you'll choose well. You're responsible for who you become, yet you're thrown into a world you didn't choose, facing death you cannot avoid. This combination of freedom and limitation, responsibility and contingency, creates a unique form of anxiety. Unlike fear, which has a specific object, angst is a mood that colors your entire existence. It's the dizziness of freedom, the weight of responsibility, the recognition that you're alone in creating your life's meaning. Nihilism is the belief that life lacks inherent meaning, purpose, or value. There are no objective moral truths, no cosmic plan, no ultimate point to existence. The universe is indifferent to human concerns. When you die, you simply cease to exist, and eventually the universe itself will end in heat death. In the face of this, nihilism asks, why do anything? Why pursue goals, form relationships, create art? Some embrace nihilism as liberating. If nothing matters objectively, you're free to create your own meaning. Others find it despairing. Nietzsche warned that nihilism was becoming the condition of modern life as traditional religious and metaphysical beliefs collapsed. He saw overcoming nihilism, finding ways to affirm life without illusions, as the great challenge of modernity. Albert Camus described the absurd as the confrontation between the human need for meaning and the silent, indifferent universe. We long to understand why we exist, to find purpose and order. But the universe offers no answers. It simply is, without reason or goal. This mismatch creates the absurd. Camus argued against suicide as a response to the absurd. Nor should we escape into false hope, religious or philosophical systems that promise meaning that isn't there. Instead, we should revolt against the absurd by living fully despite it. His image is Sisyphus, condemned to roll a boulder up a hill for eternity, only to watch it roll back down. Sisyphus's task is meaningless and endless. Yet Camus suggests we must imagine Sisyphus happy, finding satisfaction in the struggle itself, creating meaning through defiant persistence. Nietzsche's eternal recurrence is a thought experiment meant to test your life. Imagine that you will live your exact life over and over, infinitely. Every joy and every suffering, every triumph and every failure, repeated endlessly without change. Could you embrace this fate? Would you want to live your life again and again? Most people would say no, revealing dissatisfaction with how they're living. Nietzsche's point is not that eternal recurrence is true, but that it provides a standard for living. You should live so that you could will eternal recurrence. Live so fully, so authentically, that you'd be willing to repeat your life infinitely. The eternal recurrence is a test of life affirmation. Amor Fati the love of fate, is Nietzsche's ideal attitude toward life. It means not just accepting what happens, but embracing it, loving it as necessary. Don't wish things had gone differently. Don't resent your circumstances or misfortunes. Instead, see everything that happens as essential to who you are. Love your fate because it's yours. This doesn't mean passivity. You still strive and struggle and try to shape your life, but you don't waste energy on regret or resentment. You affirm all of life, the painful along with the pleasant, as part of becoming who you are. Amor fati is an extremely demanding ideal, perhaps impossible to fully achieve. But as an aspiration, it points toward a way of living that transforms suffering into something affirmable. Terror management theory is a psychological theory with philosophical implications. It proposes that much human behavior is driven by awareness of mortality. We're the only animals who know we will die. This knowledge creates existential terror. To manage this terror, we construct worldviews and cultural systems that provide meaning and a sense of permanence. Religion promises literal immortality. Nationalism and ideology offer symbolic immortality through being part of something larger that continues after we die. Even smaller things, like maintaining self-esteem and adhering to cultural norms, help buffer death anxiety. Terror management theory has been tested experimentally, and research suggests that reminders of mortality do affect behavior, making people more defensive of their worldviews and more hostile to those who challenge them. The theory suggests that many aspects of culture and psychology are responses to the uniquely human awareness of death. Ontological shock is the profound disorientation that occurs when information shatters your fundamental worldview. It's not just learning something surprising, it's having the basic categories through which you understand reality called into question. If you discovered that we're living in a simulation, or that an alien civilization has been observing Earth for millennia, or that consciousness persists after death, you would experience ontological shock. The ground would shift beneath your feet. Everything you thought you knew would need re-evaluation. Ontological shock is traumatic because humans need stable frameworks for making sense of experience. When those frameworks collapse, even temporarily, it's deeply disturbing. Yet such shocks can also be transformative, forcing you to think in new ways and question assumptions you didn't realize you were making. Philosophy of religion. Questions about God, faith, and the relationship between religion and reason have occupied philosophers throughout history. Let us explore some of these enduring questions. The problem of evil is perhaps the most powerful challenge to belief in an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good God. If God is all-powerful, God can prevent evil. If God is all-knowing, God knows about all evil. If God is all-good, God wants to prevent evil. Yet evil exists. Terrible suffering, natural disasters, cruelty, pain without apparent purpose. How can this be reconciled with a perfect God? Various responses have been offered. Some argue that free will requires the possibility of evil, and free will is so valuable that God permits evil for its sake. Others argue that what appears evil to us serves some greater good we cannot see. Still others deny that God is all-powerful or all-good in the traditional sense. But for many, the problem of evil remains the most difficult challenge to theistic belief. Pascal's wager is a pragmatic argument for believing in God. Blaise Pascal argued that we must wager on God's existence because it's impossible to remain neutral. If you believe and God exists, you gain infinite reward, eternal happiness. If you believe and God doesn't exist, you lose little, maybe some pleasures foregone. If you don't believe and God exists, you face infinite punishment. If you don't believe and God doesn't exist, you gain little. So the rational wager is to believe. Critics point out many problems. Which God should you believe in? Different religions make different claims. Can you choose to believe, or do beliefs form involuntarily? Does God want belief based on a calculated wager rather than genuine faith? Despite these objections, Pascal's wager raises interesting questions about the rationality of religious belief when stakes are high and evidence is uncertain. The ontological argument attempts to prove God's existence through reason alone, without empirical observation. Anselm's version defines God as that than which nothing greater can be conceived. Now, something that exists is greater than something that doesn't exist. If God doesn't exist, then we can conceive of something greater, namely a God who does exist. But then God wouldn't be that than which nothing greater can be conceived. Contradiction. Therefore, God must exist. This argument is fascinating and controversial. It tries to derive existence from the mere concept of God. Critics, including Kant, argue that existence is not a property that makes things greater. Whether something exists is a separate question from what properties it would have if it existed. The ontological argument continues to be debated in various reformulated versions. David Hume argued against belief in miracles. A miracle is a violation of natural law. Natural laws are supported by vast amounts of uniform experience. The sun always rises. People always die. Water always flows downhill. Now suppose someone testifies to a miracle. Say that someone rose from the dead. What's more likely? That natural law was violated, or that the testimony is mistaken, deceptive, or misunderstood? Given the overwhelming evidence for natural laws and the frequency of mistaken testimony, it's always more rational to doubt the miracle than to believe natural law was violated. Hume doesn't say miracles are impossible, just that we can never have sufficient evidence to rationally believe in one. This argument has been influential but controversial. Believers argue that if God exists, miracles are possible, and we should be open to evidence for them. Alvin Plantinga's evolutionary argument against naturalism is a complex argument claiming that if both naturalism, the view that only natural things exist, and evolution are true, we have reason to doubt our cognitive faculties. If our beliefs are the product of evolution, they're selected for survival value, not truth. A false belief might be more adaptive than a true one if it makes you more likely to survive and reproduce. If naturalism and evolution are true, the probability that our cognitive faculties are reliable is low. But if we can't trust our cognitive faculties, we can't trust the reasoning that led us to believe naturalism and evolution. So naturalism and evolution together are self-defeating. Critics respond that beliefs that systematically misrepresent reality would generally reduce fitness, so evolution does select for generally reliable cognitive faculties, even if not perfect ones. Philosophy also examines how language works, how we interpret texts and artworks, and the nature of meaning itself. Roland Barthes proclaimed the death of the author, arguing that once a text is written, the author's intentions are irrelevant to its meaning. The text exists independently, and meaning is created through the reader's engagement with it. Different readers bring different experiences, contexts, and perspectives, creating different valid interpretations. To privilege the author's intended meaning is to limit the text's potential. This view has been influential in literary criticism and cultural studies. It empowers readers and acknowledges the plurality of interpretations. But critics argue that authorial intention must play some role in interpretation. If Shakespeare wrote Hamlet, we interpret it as a Renaissance tragedy. If we discovered it was written last year by a teenager, our interpretation would change. Complete indifference to authorial intention seems untenable. Willard Quine's Gavagai problem illustrates the indeterminacy of translation and meaning. Imagine you're a linguist studying a completely unknown language. A rabbit runs by, and a native speaker says, Gavagai. You tentatively translate this as rabbit. But how do you know that's correct? Maybe Gavagai means undetached rabbit part, or instance of rabbithood, or look, a rabbit. Any finite amount of evidence is consistent with multiple incompatible translations. There's no fact of the matter about what Gavagai really means. This radical indeterminacy extends to all language, including your own. The meanings of your words are underdetermined by all possible evidence. Quine's argument challenges the idea that meanings are determinate mental entities and raises deep questions about the nature of language and thought. Quietism in philosophy is the stance that many traditional philosophical problems are based on linguistic confusion and should be dissolved rather than solved. Instead of answering metaphysical questions, we should recognize that they arise from misusing language. Ordinary language works fine for practical purposes. Problems arise when philosophers try to use words outside their normal contexts, asking questions like, "What is time really?" or "Do numbers exist?" Quietists suggest we should simply describe how language is actually used and stop trying to dig beneath to some deeper reality. This view, influenced by Wittgenstein, is controversial. Critics argue that genuine deep questions exist, and quietism is a form of intellectual retreat. Defenders argue that much philosophy wastes time on pseudo-problems that disappear when we're clear about language. Socratic irony is the pose of ignorance adopted by Socrates in Plato's dialogues. Socrates claims to know nothing and asks seemingly innocent questions. But his questions expose contradictions and confusions in his interlocutor's beliefs. Through persistent questioning, Socrates reveals that those who claim to know, including supposed experts, don't really understand what they're talking about. Socratic irony is a teaching method. By pretending ignorance, Socrates encourages others to think for themselves and discover truth through dialogue. But it can also be frustrating and humiliating for those being questioned. Socratic irony raises questions about the ethics of teaching and whether it's manipulative to feign ignorance. Yet it remains a powerful technique for promoting critical thinking. The paradox of fiction asks why we feel real emotions for fictional characters and events. When you watch a sad movie, you cry, even though you know it's fiction. You don't believe the character really exists or that the events really happened, yet you feel genuine sadness. How is this possible? Normally, emotions seem to require beliefs. You're afraid of a dog because you believe it might bite you, but in fiction, you don't believe, yet you still feel. Some philosophers argue we half believe or pretend to believe while engaging with fiction. Others argue that emotions don't require beliefs after all, just the right kind of representation or imagination. The paradox reveals something about the nature of emotional response and our engagement with art. Logical positivism was an early 20th century movement that sought to make philosophy scientific. The positivists proposed the verification principle. A statement is meaningful only if it can be verified through observation or is true by definition, like mathematical or logical truths. Statements about God, ethics, metaphysics that can't be empirically verified are literally meaningless, neither true nor false. This radical view would eliminate most of traditional philosophy. Logical positivism was influential for a time, but ultimately collapsed. Critics pointed out that the verification principle itself cannot be verified empirically and isn't true by definition. So by its own standard, it's meaningless. Still, logical positivism's emphasis on clarity and empirical testability influenced philosophy of science and analytic philosophy more broadly. Philosophy of science and cosmology. Science raises profound philosophical questions about the nature of the universe, the limits of knowledge, and our place in the cosmos. The anthropic principle observes that the universe must be compatible with the existence of conscious observers, because we are here observing it. This seems trivial, but it has profound implications. The laws of physics appear fine-tuned for life. If fundamental constants were slightly different, stars couldn't form, chemistry would be impossible, life couldn't exist. Why is the universe so perfectly suited for us? One answer is the multiverse. Perhaps countless universes exist with different constants, and we necessarily find ourselves in one where life is possible, because we couldn't exist in the others. Another answer is design. Perhaps the universe was intentionally created with life in mind. The anthropic principle doesn't solve these questions, but reframes them, suggesting that some apparent cosmic coincidences are explained by selection bias. We can only observe a universe capable of producing observers. The Copernican principle states that humans do not occupy a privileged position in the universe. Just as Copernicus showed that Earth is not the center of the solar system, Modern cosmology suggests we're not special or central in any cosmic sense. We live on an ordinary planet, orbiting an ordinary star, in an ordinary galaxy, in an ordinary part of the universe. This principle has been methodologically fruitful in science, leading to important discoveries. But it's also been challenged. Some argue that consciousness is so unusual, at least in our region of space, that observers like us are special, even if our physical location isn't. The Copernican principle is both a scientific hypothesis and a philosophical stance about human significance. The Gaia hypothesis, proposed by James Lovelock, suggests that Earth functions as a single, self-regulating living system. The biosphere, atmosphere, oceans, and soil interact in ways that maintain conditions suitable for life. Life doesn't just adapt to its environment, it shapes the environment to maintain habitability. For example, living organisms have maintained atmospheric oxygen at levels that support complex life for hundreds of millions of years. The Gaia hypothesis is controversial. Some see it as scientifically valuable, highlighting feedback loops in Earth systems. Others see it as mystical or teleological, implying purpose where there's only mechanism. Lovelock himself has clarified that Gaia isn't conscious or purposeful, just a complex system whose feedbacks happen to maintain stability. But the idea remains powerful and provocative. Quantum superposition is the principle that particles can exist in multiple states simultaneously until measured. An electron can be in a superposition of different positions or spins. Only when you observe it does it collapse into a definite state. This has profound philosophical implications. What counts as observation? Does consciousness play a role in creating reality? Some interpretations of quantum mechanics suggest that multiple realities exist in superposition, splitting into separate branches. When observations occur, the many worlds interpretation. Others suggest that the wave function is not a complete description of reality. Quantum mechanics forces us to reconsider what we mean by reality, observation, and the role of the observer in physics. Leibniz's principle of sufficient reason states that everything must have a reason or explanation. Nothing happens without a cause. No fact is true without a reason why it's true rather than false. This principle has been influential in philosophy and science, driving the search for explanations. But it faces challenges. Some things might be brute facts, true without further explanation, and the principle seems to lead to infinite regress. If everything needs an explanation, then the explanation needs an explanation, and so on endlessly. Unless there's something self-explanatory, a necessary being or fact that doesn't require further explanation. Leibniz used the principle to argue for God as the ultimate explanation. Others have questioned whether the principle is true or whether we should accept brute facts. The butterfly effect, a concept from chaos theory, illustrates how small changes in initial conditions can lead to vastly different outcomes in complex systems. The metaphor is that a butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil could set off a chain of events leading to a tornado in Texas. Chaotic systems are deterministic, governed by rules, but effectively unpredictable because tiny uncertainties get amplified exponentially. This has philosophical implications for determinism and predictability. Even if the universe is deterministic, if it's chaotic, we can never predict its evolution precisely. The butterfly effect also raises questions about responsibility and causation. If tiny actions can have huge consequences, how far does our causal responsibility extend? And how do we trace causes when everything affects everything else in complex ways? Finally, let us consider questions about human action, the will, and what makes us responsible for what we do. Akrasia, or weakness of will, occurs when you act against your own better judgment. You know you shouldn't eat the cake because you're on a diet, but you eat it anyway. You know you should study for the exam, but you watch television instead. How is this possible? If you judge that you shouldn't do something, why would you do it? Some philosophers deny that akrasia is possible. If you truly judged you shouldn't eat the cake, you wouldn't. If you ate it, that reveals that your real judgment was different from what you thought. Others say Acrasia is all too real and shows that humans are not purely rational. We have conflicting motivations, and reason doesn't always win. Acrasia raises questions about rationality, self-control, and the unity of the self. Are you one unified agent, or a collection of competing desires and judgments? Harry Frankfurt developed cases challenging the principle that moral responsibility requires that you could have done otherwise. Imagine someone plans to do something wrong and does it. But unbeknownst to them, there was a device in their brain that would have made them do it anyway if they had tried to refrain. So they couldn't have done otherwise. The device was unnecessary because they chose to do it on their own. Are they responsible? Frankfurt argues yes. What matters for responsibility is not whether you could have done otherwise, but whether the action flows from your own will and character. The Frankfurt cases have been very influential, though also controversial. They suggest that even in a deterministic universe where you couldn't do otherwise, you might still be morally responsible if your actions reflect your authentic self. The prisoner's dilemma is a game theory scenario illustrating how individual rationality can lead to collectively bad outcomes. Two prisoners are interrogated separately. Each can either cooperate with the other by staying silent or defect by betraying the other. If both cooperate, both get light sentences. If both defect, both get moderate sentences. If one defects and the other cooperates, the defector goes free while the cooperator gets a harsh sentence. From each prisoner's perspective, defecting is better regardless of what the other does. If the other cooperates, you're better off defecting to go free. If the other defects, you're better off defecting to avoid the harsh sentence. So rational self-interest dictates defection. But if both follow this logic, both defect and get moderate sentences, worse than if both had cooperated. The dilemma appears in many contexts, from arms races to environmental protection to everyday cooperation. It shows why trust and communication are essential, and why individual rationality isn't always collectively rational. These 100 concepts represent just a sampling of philosophy's riches. Each idea branches into countless questions and debates. Philosophy is not a collection of answers, but an ongoing conversation across centuries, a shared human effort to understand ourselves and our world. The questions philosophy asks are often ancient, but each generation must grapple with them anew in light of new knowledge and experience. As you drift towards sleep, let these ideas settle in your mind. You need not understand everything perfectly. Philosophy is a journey, not a destination. It's the love of wisdom, not wisdom itself. The questions matter as much as the answers, perhaps more. They wake us from dogmatic slumber, force us to examine our assumptions, show us new possibilities for thought and life. What is real? How can we know? How should we live? What gives life meaning? These questions have no simple or final answers, but in asking them seriously, in thinking deeply about them, we become more fully human. We join a conversation that stretches back to ancient Greece and forward into the unknowable future. We connect with all those who have wondered, questioned, sought understanding. Philosophy teaches humility. The more you learn, the more you realize how much remains unknown. Even the brightest philosophers disagree profoundly. This doesn't mean truth doesn't exist, or that all views are equally valid. It means truth is difficult, that reality is complex, that honest thinkers can look at the same evidence and reach different conclusions. This recognition should make us both more confident in pursuing truth and more humble about claiming to possess it. Philosophy teaches critical thinking. It trains you to question assumptions, spot logical errors, consider alternative perspectives. These skills apply far beyond academic philosophy. In an age of misinformation and polarization, the ability to think clearly and critically is more valuable than ever. Philosophy gives you tools to cut through rhetoric, to distinguish good arguments from bad, to form your own judgments based on reason and evidence. Philosophy teaches wonder. It returns us to the child's ability to ask why. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why am I me rather than someone else? Why does red look like this? Children ask such questions naturally before being taught to stop. Philosophy gives permission to ask them again, to take nothing for granted, to wonder at the ordinary and everyday. This sense of wonder enriches life, making the familiar strange and therefore interesting again. Different philosophical traditions offer different emphases and insights. Western philosophy, beginning with the ancient Greeks, has emphasized logic, analysis, systematic argument. It has produced remarkable theories in metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, and logic. But it's not the only philosophical tradition. Eastern philosophies, from Buddhism to Taoism to Confucianism, offer different perspectives, emphasizing practice over theory, harmony over analysis, wisdom over knowledge. Indigenous philosophies worldwide offer yet other perspectives, often deeply connected to land, community, and story. Each tradition has insights to offer, blind spots to overcome. The future of philosophy lies partly in dialogue across traditions, learning from each other's strengths. Contemporary philosophy continues to evolve, engaging with new challenges. Advances in neuroscience raise questions about consciousness and free will. Artificial intelligence raises questions about mind, personhood, and ethics. Climate change raises questions about our relationship with nature and responsibilities to future generations. Biotechnology raises questions about human nature and enhancement. Each new development creates new philosophical puzzles and makes old questions urgent in new ways. Some worry that philosophy is impractical, irrelevant to real life. This misunderstands philosophy's role. Philosophy doesn't typically solve immediate practical problems. You won't consult Kant when deciding what to have for dinner, or Aristotle when fixing your car. But philosophy shapes how we think about bigger questions, how we understand ourselves, what we value, how we reason about difficult choices. It influences culture, law, politics, science, education, art. Ideas that begin in philosophy eventually permeate society, shaping how everyone thinks, even those who never read philosophy. Moreover, some philosophical questions are intensely practical. How should we respond to climate change? What duties do we have to refugees? When is war justified? Should we permit genetic enhancement? These are both philosophical and practical questions. Philosophy doesn't give simple answers, but it clarifies what's at stake, reveals hidden assumptions, distinguishes different values in conflict. It makes us better equipped to think about hard problems with no obvious solutions. Philosophy also matters personally for living well. Socrates said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Through philosophical reflection, you come to understand your own beliefs, values, and assumptions. You decide consciously what kind of person to be, rather than drifting through life driven by unconsidered impulses and social pressures. This doesn't mean you need to be a professional philosopher. It means taking time to think about what matters, why you believe what you believe, how you should live. The philosophical life is characterized by certain virtues: intellectual honesty, willingness to follow arguments where they lead even when uncomfortable, ability to change your mind when evidence warrants, humility about the limits of your knowledge, generosity in interpreting others' views, care in formulating your own. These virtues make you not only a better thinker, but a better person. They promote understanding, reduce dogmatism, encourage dialogue rather than combat in disagreements. As you rest now, consider how you might engage with philosophy in your own life. You might read widely, from ancient texts to contemporary works. You might join discussions, whether formal classes or informal conversations. You might keep a philosophical journal, recording thoughts and questions. You might practice philosophical meditation, taking time to reflect deeply on fundamental questions. You might engage philosophical issues in your daily life, noticing when ethical dilemmas arise, when assumptions go unquestioned, when reasoning becomes unclear. Philosophy is not reserved for specialists in ivory towers. It belongs to everyone who thinks, who questions, who seeks to understand. Every person who wonders why things are the way they are, who asks whether their beliefs are justified, who struggles with moral choices, is engaged in philosophy. The difference between casual and serious philosophy is not in the questions themselves, but in the depth and rigor with which we pursue them. The concepts we've explored tonight represent different ways humanity has tried to make sense of existence. Metaphysics asks, what is fundamentally real? Is everything ultimately physical, or does consciousness exist independently? Is reality deterministic, or do we have genuine freedom? Does time flow, or is it an illusion? These questions shape how we understand ourselves and our place in the universe. Epistemology asks how we can know anything at all. Can we trust our senses? Can we justify our beliefs? Is certainty possible, or must we accept fundamental uncertainty? These questions remind us that knowledge is harder to achieve than it seems, that we must remain humble and open to correction, that the search for truth is ongoing and demanding. Ethics asks how we should live, what we owe to others, what makes actions right or wrong. Should we focus on consequences or principles, on character or rules? Are moral truths objective or relative? These questions don't have easy answers, but wrestling with them makes us more thoughtful moral agents, better equipped to navigate the complex ethical landscape of modern life. Logic and paradoxes reveal the limits of reason itself. Some questions lead to contradictions. Some concepts are inherently vague. Some problems have no solution. This doesn't mean reason is useless, but it means we must use it carefully, aware of its limitations and pitfalls. Paradoxes are not just puzzles, but windows into the structure of thought and language. Political philosophy asks how we should organize society, what justice requires, how to balance individual freedom with collective good. These questions are urgent and practical. Every political debate presupposes answers to philosophical questions about rights, equality, freedom, and authority. By making these assumptions explicit, philosophy helps us think more clearly about political issues. Existentialism and absurdism confront the possibility that life has no inherent meaning, that we are radically free and responsible for creating our own values in an indifferent universe. This can be terrifying or liberating, depending on how we respond. These philosophies ask us to live authentically, to embrace our freedom, to create meaning through our choices and commitments rather than waiting to discover it. Philosophy of religion explores the deepest questions about ultimate reality, the existence of God, the problem of evil, the nature of faith. Whether you are religious or not, these questions matter because they concern the most fundamental aspects of existence and meaning. They force us to think about what grounds morality, whether existence has purpose, what if anything transcends the physical world. Philosophy of language and interpretation reveals that meaning is more complex than it appears. Language shapes thought in profound ways. How we interpret texts and each other depends on context, convention, and perspective. Understanding these complexities makes us better communicators and more sensitive to nuance and ambiguity. Philosophy of science examines the foundations and implications of scientific knowledge. What makes a theory scientific? How do we explain natural phenomena? What does quantum mechanics tell us about reality? These questions lie at the intersection of philosophy and science, each discipline informing the other. Questions about action and responsibility ask what makes us free, what makes us responsible for our choices, how we should decide when rationality pulls in different directions. These questions connect to our daily experience of deliberation and choice, helping us understand ourselves as agents in the world. Throughout history, philosophy has often advanced through dialogue and debate. Socrates discussed ideas with fellow Athenians in the marketplace. Medieval philosophers disputed questions in universities. Modern philosophers publish papers and respond to each other's arguments. This dialectical process, thesis meeting antithesis to produce synthesis, drives philosophical progress. We test ideas by subjecting them to criticism, refining them in light of objections, sometimes abandoning them when better alternatives appear. This means you should approach philosophy dialogically, read different perspectives, consider objections to views you hold, try to understand why intelligent people disagree with you, steelman opposing arguments, presenting them in their strongest form rather than straw manning them. This practice strengthens your own thinking and promotes intellectual humility. You might discover that views you dismissed actually have merit, or that your own views need qualification and nuance. Philosophy also advances through thought experiments, imaginary scenarios that isolate particular philosophical questions. The trolley problem isolates questions about action versus inaction. The experience machine tests theories of value. The Chinese room challenges theories of artificial intelligence. The veil of ignorance models fair reasoning about justice. These scenarios are not meant to be realistic. They deliberately simplify to focus attention on specific philosophical issues. Critics sometimes object that thought experiments are too artificial, divorced from real complexity. But their artificiality is their strength, allowing us to think clearly about one thing at a time. Many philosophical concepts have influenced culture far beyond academic philosophy. Utilitarianism shapes policy debates about healthcare and economics. Social contract theory underlies political systems. Feminist philosophy has transformed understanding of gender. Environmental philosophy shapes responses to ecological crisis. Existentialism influenced literature, film, and psychology. Philosophy of mind informs artificial intelligence research and neuroscience. These influences flow both ways. Cultural and scientific developments raise new philosophical questions, which philosophers address, producing insights that flow back into culture and science. The relationship between philosophy and other disciplines is complex and productive. Philosophy of physics engages with quantum mechanics and relativity. Philosophy of biology addresses evolution and life. Philosophy of psychology examines the nature of mind and cognition. Philosophy of mathematics explores the foundations of mathematical knowledge. These subdisciplines require understanding both philosophy and the relevant science. They show that philosophy is not isolated from empirical inquiry, but deeply connected to it. At the same time, philosophy maintains independence from empirical science. Empirical observation can tell us what is the case, but philosophy asks whether it must be that way, what it means, what values and assumptions are involved. Science describes the world. Philosophy interprets and evaluates those descriptions. Science tells us we evolved through natural selection. Philosophy asks what this means for morality and meaning. Science maps the brain. Philosophy asks whether this explains consciousness. The two domains complement each other. Some philosophers work in highly technical areas, using formal logic and mathematics. Others work in more literary styles, using narrative and metaphor. Some focus narrowly on specific problems. Others pursue broad synthetic visions. This diversity is healthy. Philosophy needs both careful technical analysis and big-picture synthesis. It needs both critical examination of arguments and imaginative exploration of possibilities. Different temperaments and skills contribute to the collective enterprise. One ongoing debate concerns whether philosophy makes progress. Science clearly progresses. We know more physics now than a century ago. But do we know more philosophy? We still debate the same questions Plato discussed. Some conclude that philosophy makes no progress, just rehashes old debates. Others argue that philosophy does progress, but differently than science. We don't accumulate philosophical facts. Instead, we deepen understanding, refine concepts, eliminate bad arguments, explore new possibilities. We understand the hard problem of consciousness better than Descartes did, even if we haven't solved it. We understand ethical theories better than ancient philosophers did, even if we haven't proven which is correct. Progress in philosophy means better maps of conceptual terrain, not arrival at a destination. Another debate concerns whether philosophy should be systematic or piecemeal. Should philosophers construct comprehensive systems explaining everything, like Aristotle, Aquinas, Kant, or Hegel? Or should they address specific problems one at a time, like much contemporary analytic philosophy? Grand systems are impressive and provide unified worldviews, but they're also rigid and hard to revise. They make large claims on limited evidence. Piecemeal philosophy is more modest and careful. But it can lose sight of how issues connect, fragment into technical subdisciplines that don't communicate. Probably philosophy needs both approaches, grand vision and careful detail, each correcting the excesses of the other. Philosophy also faces questions about its own nature and value. Is philosophy fundamentally different from science or continuous with it? Should philosophy aim at truth, or has postmodern critique shown that claims to truth are naive? Is philosophy culturally specific, or are some questions and methods universal? Does philosophy have practical value, or is it merely theoretical? These metaphilosophical questions lack consensus answers, but they show that philosophy applies to itself, that it's self-reflective and self-critical. The value of philosophy includes but extends beyond finding answers. Philosophy cultivates certain intellectual virtues and capacities. It trains you to think clearly, argue rigorously, analyze concepts, detect fallacies, consider alternatives. These skills transfer to any domain requiring careful thought. Philosophy also cultivates certain attitudes: wonder, curiosity, humility, open-mindedness, tolerance for ambiguity. These attitudes make you more receptive to learning and less dogmatic in belief. Philosophy also provides intellectual pleasure. There's joy in understanding, in seeing connections, in grasping a difficult argument, in discovering new perspectives. This pleasure is intrinsic, not instrumental. We pursue understanding partly for its own sake, because we're curious creatures who want to know. Philosophy satisfies this deep human drive to comprehend ourselves and our world. Moreover, philosophy addresses questions we cannot help asking. As self-conscious beings aware of our mortality, we wonder what it all means. As moral agents making choices with consequences for others, we wonder what's right. As rational beings capable of knowledge, we wonder what we can know and how. These are not optional questions for creatures like us. They arise inevitably from the human condition. Philosophy takes these unavoidable questions seriously, refusing to dismiss them as meaningless or unanswerable without careful investigation. Different people are drawn to different areas of philosophy based on temperament and interest. If you're fascinated by the nature of reality, you might gravitate toward metaphysics. If you care deeply about right and wrong, ethics will attract you. If you're skeptical and question everything, epistemology addresses your concerns. If you wonder about life's meaning, existentialism speaks to you. If you're interested in society and justice, political philosophy awaits. Philosophy has space for every kind of intellectual curiosity. You need not choose just one area. Philosophical questions interconnect. Metaphysical views about free will affect ethics. Epistemology shapes philosophy of science. Political philosophy presupposes moral philosophy. Philosophy of mind connects to metaphysics and epistemology. The more you explore, the more you see these connections, the more integrated your understanding becomes. Reading philosophy can be challenging. Philosophical texts often require slow, careful reading. You may need to read passages multiple times to grasp their meaning. This difficulty is not a flaw, but reflects the complexity of the questions and the precision required to address them. Take your time. Discuss what you read with others. Write out your thoughts and questions. Philosophy rewards sustained engagement. Start with accessible introductions before diving into original texts. Many classic philosophical works presuppose knowledge of earlier philosophy and use terminology that's unfamiliar to beginners. Secondary sources can provide helpful context and explanation. But eventually, engage primary sources directly. Reading Plato, Descartes, Hume, Kant, or Nietzsche firsthand is irreplaceable. You encounter their actual thoughts, their ways of expressing ideas, their arguments in full context. Don't be intimidated by philosophy's difficulty or history. You don't need to master everything before having your own thoughts. Philosophy is not just learned, it's done. You can think philosophically about your own experiences and questions. Your thoughts matter. Philosophy is not an esoteric discipline for experts. but a human activity anyone can engage. At the same time, recognize that philosophy requires effort and learning. It's a discipline with standards of argumentation and analysis. Not all opinions are equally good. Some arguments are valid, others are fallacious. Some positions are coherent, others are contradictory. Part of learning philosophy is learning to distinguish good from bad reasoning, strong from weak arguments. This doesn't mean there are always clear right answers, but it means some approaches are better than others. Philosophy also connects to wisdom traditions worldwide. Buddhism offers sophisticated philosophy of mind and ethics. Taoism provides profound metaphysics. Confucianism develops detailed social and political philosophy. African philosophy explores concepts of community and personhood. Indigenous philosophies worldwide offer insights about humanity's relationship with nature. These traditions use different methods and emphasize different values than Western philosophy, enriching our understanding. Cross-cultural philosophy reveals that some questions are universal, while others are culturally specific. All cultures ask about reality, knowledge, morality, meaning. But they frame these questions differently, reach different conclusions, value different approaches. Engaging philosophy cross-culturally challenges assumptions about what counts as philosophy, what methods are legitimate, what questions are important. It reveals that Western philosophy's emphasis on logic and analysis is one approach among many. As philosophy becomes more global and diverse, it becomes richer. Perspectives previously marginalized, women philosophers, philosophers of color, non-Western philosophers, are gaining recognition. This isn't just about representation, though representation matters. It's about expanding the range of questions asked, approaches taken, experiences examined. Philosophy done from different social positions reveals aspects of reality that philosophy done only from privileged positions misses. Contemporary challenges require philosophical attention. Artificial intelligence raises questions about consciousness, personhood, rights, responsibility. If we create artificial minds, what moral status do they have? Could they suffer? Could they be persons? What responsibilities do we have toward them and they toward us? These aren't just technical questions, but deeply philosophical. Biotechnology raises questions about human nature and enhancement. Should we genetically modify our children, enhance cognitive abilities, extend lifespan indefinitely? What would these changes mean for personal identity, for society, for what it means to be human? Philosophy must grapple with these questions as they shift from science fiction to real possibility. Climate change raises philosophical questions about responsibility, justice, value. What duties do we have to future generations, to non-human nature? How should we make decisions under uncertainty? How do we balance present needs against future catastrophe? These questions require both ethical reasoning and political philosophy, both careful analysis and practical wisdom. Globalization and technology are transforming human society at unprecedented pace. Philosophy must address questions about culture, identity, community in a globally connected world. What happens to local cultures and traditions? How do we maintain community in digital spaces? What new forms of social organization are possible? What are the ethical implications of surveillance, social media, algorithmic decision-making? These contemporary challenges show that philosophy remains vitally relevant. The questions change with technology and society, but they remain fundamentally philosophical. No amount of empirical data will tell us what we ought to do, what we should value, what kind of world we want to create. These require philosophical reflection, ethical reasoning, careful thought about purposes and values. Philosophy also contributes to personal development and mental health. Philosophical practice can reduce anxiety, increase resilience, promote well-being. The Stoics developed practices for managing emotions and accepting what you cannot change. Buddhist philosophy offers techniques for reducing suffering through insight and meditation. Existentialist philosophy helps people confront freedom and responsibility. These aren't replacements for therapy or medicine when needed, but philosophy can complement other approaches to living well. The examined life that Socrates praised involves ongoing reflection on how you live, what you believe, what you value. It means not just accepting default beliefs and values from your culture, but critically evaluating them. It means taking responsibility for who you become, making conscious choices about your character and commitments. This examination is not morbid introspection, but healthy self-awareness. Philosophy teaches that you are not fixed. Through reflection and practice, you can change your beliefs, develop virtues, overcome bad habits, become more fully who you want to be. This possibility of transformation is both liberating and demanding. You cannot blame everything on circumstances or genetics or upbringing. You have some responsibility for shaping yourself. But this responsibility is also opportunity. You're not trapped in who you are now. As you lie here, breathing slowly, thoughts drifting, consider what questions call to you. What puzzles do you find yourself returning to? What assumptions do you take for granted? What beliefs do you hold that might not be justified? What values guide your life and why? These questions aren't meant to disturb your rest, but to invite gentle reflection. Philosophy at its best combines rigor and wonder, analysis and imagination, criticism and creativity. It's both science-like in its demand for logical argument and evidence, and art-like in its creative exploration of possibilities and meanings. It requires both cold reason to evaluate arguments dispassionately and warm engagement to care about questions and their human significance. Great philosophers throughout history have displayed this combination. Plato wrote dialogues that were both philosophical arguments and literary masterpieces. Descartes combined mathematical rigor with radical doubt and reconstruction. Hume united sharp skeptical analysis with sympathy for human nature. Kant developed systematic philosophy of extraordinary precision while addressing questions of morality and meaning. Nietzsche wrote philosophy as aphorism and poetry while making precise conceptual points. Each found their own way to do philosophy, their own voice and style. You too can find your way into philosophy. You don't need to imitate anyone else's approach. Philosophy accommodates diverse styles and methods. Some write analytically, breaking problems into components. Others write synthetically, connecting everything to everything else. Some use formal logic and argument. Others use narrative and metaphor. What matters is thinking carefully and honestly about important questions. The philosophical tradition is not a closed canon, but an ongoing conversation. New voices continually join, bringing new perspectives, asking new questions, challenging old assumptions. You can enter this conversation. Your thoughts and questions matter. Philosophy is not finished. It cannot be finished as long as humans exist, thinking and wondering. Every philosophical question branches into further questions. Why is there something rather than nothing? Leads to, what do we mean by something and nothing? What would count as an answer? Can such questions even be answered? This regress isn't frustrating, but generative. Each question opens onto others, creating an endless landscape to explore. This inexhaustibility means you need never fear running out of things to think about. Philosophy offers lifelong engagement. The more you learn, the more you see how much remains unknown. This can be humbling but also exciting. You're never done, never finished, always able to go deeper, think harder, see more. Philosophy also offers connection across time. Reading Plato, you join a conversation from 2,400 years ago. His questions are your questions. His puzzles puzzle you. Reading him, you're not learning dead history, but engaging living thought. The ancients become contemporaries in the realm of ideas. This continuity across centuries shows something important about human nature. We share fundamental concerns and capacities with people radically different from us in time and culture. Yet philosophy also changes. Contemporary philosophy looks very different from ancient philosophy in methods, questions, and style. This evolution shows that philosophy responds to its context. New discoveries, technologies, and social arrangements create new questions and revise old ones. Philosophy is both timeless in its fundamental questions and timely in its responses to particular historical moments. This balance between continuity and change characterizes living traditions. Philosophy is not static dogma, but dynamic inquiry. It preserves insights from the past while remaining open to revision. It respects tradition while encouraging innovation. It maintains standards while remaining open to new approaches. The philosophical attitude combines several elements that might seem in tension. Confidence that truth exists and can be pursued, yet humility about having found it. Commitment to reason and argument, yet recognition of reason's limits. Seriousness about important questions, yet playfulness in exploring ideas. Systematic rigor, yet openness to unsystematic insight. These apparent tensions create productive dialectic driving philosophical progress. Cultivating this philosophical attitude benefits all areas of life. In personal relationships, it promotes understanding and reduces dogmatism. In professional work, it encourages creative problem solving and critical evaluation. In citizenship, it fosters informed deliberation and reasoned debate. In spiritual life, it deepens reflection on meaning and purpose. Philosophy is not separate from life, but a way of living more thoughtfully. Some fear philosophy will undermine their beliefs or leave them paralyzed by doubt. This fear is understandable, but usually unfounded. Philosophy does challenge unexamined beliefs. It forces you to defend views you've taken for granted. But this challenge strengthens rather than weakens genuine convictions. If your beliefs survive philosophical scrutiny, you hold them more firmly, understanding why they're justified. If they don't survive, better to know this and revise than persist in error. As for paralysis, philosophy actually helps with decision-making by clarifying what's at stake, what values conflict, what consequences follow. You won't find algorithms that mechanically generate answers to ethical dilemmas, but you'll develop better judgment about how to think through difficult choices. Philosophy provides tools for reasoning, not recipes for living. Religion and philosophy have complex relationships. Sometimes they conflict when religious dogma meets philosophical questioning. Sometimes they complement when philosophy clarifies religious concepts or religion provides philosophical insights. Many great philosophers were religious. Many religious thinkers engaged philosophy. Neither domain owns questions about meaning, morality, and ultimate reality. Both approach these questions with different methods and assumptions. Whether you're religious or secular, philosophy offers valuable perspectives. If religious, philosophy can deepen your understanding of your faith, clarify its concepts, address challenges to it. If secular, philosophy can explore questions of meaning and value without religious assumptions. Philosophy accommodates diverse worldviews, asking not what you must believe, but how to think clearly about what you do believe. The history of philosophy reveals both progress and plurality. We understand many questions better than our predecessors. We've eliminated bad arguments, refined concepts, developed better theories, but we haven't converged on consensus about fundamental questions. Smart, informed philosophers still disagree about nearly everything. This suggests that philosophical questions are genuinely difficult, perhaps in some cases admitting multiple legitimate approaches rather than single correct answers. This plurality need not lead to relativism. That philosophers disagree doesn't mean all views are equally good. Some positions are more coherent, better supported, more explanatory than others, but it does suggest intellectual humility. If brilliant people disagree after centuries of debate, you should hold your views somewhat tentatively, remain open to alternatives, resist dogmatism. Engaging philosophy seriously often transforms how you see the world. Ordinary experiences become philosophically rich. You notice assumptions in conversation. You see ethical dimensions in everyday choices. You wonder about consciousness when you wake from dreams. You think about personal identity when you look at old photographs. Philosophy makes the familiar strange, revealing depths in what seems simple. This transformation isn't just intellectual, but existential. Philosophy can change who you are, what you care about, how you live. Reading the Stoics might make you more resilient. Engaging existentialism might make you more authentic. Studying ethics might make you more conscientious. These changes happen not through explicit rules, but through shifting perspectives and developing sensibilities. Philosophy also cultivates tolerance, not indifference to truth, but recognition that intelligent people can reasonably disagree. This tolerance is essential in pluralistic societies where people hold diverse worldviews. Philosophy provides tools for dialogue across difference, for finding common ground, for disagreeing productively rather than destructively. At the same time, philosophy demands that some positions be rejected. Not all views are tolerable. Views that deny basic human dignity, that advocate violence, that reject evidence and reason entirely, these cannot be accommodated. Philosophy is tolerant, but not infinitely so. It maintains standards while acknowledging legitimate plurality within those standards. The doing of philosophy improves with practice. Like any skill, philosophical thinking develops through use. Read philosophy regularly. Write out your thoughts. Discuss ideas with others. Apply philosophical concepts to your experience. Over time, you'll think more clearly, reason more rigorously, see connections and implications more readily. Philosophy also benefits from interdisciplinary engagement. Study science to understand what philosophy must account for. Study history to see how ideas developed. Study literature and art for insight into human experience. Study mathematics for logical rigor. Study psychology and sociology for understanding of human nature and society. Philosophy connects to everything, and everything enriches philosophy. As these thoughts settle, as your mind relaxes, let philosophy become part of your inner landscape, not as burden or obligation, but as resource and companion. In difficult times, philosophical ideas can provide comfort and guidance. In moments of wonder, they can deepen appreciation. In ethical dilemmas, they can clarify thinking. In conversations, they can promote understanding. You need not become a professional philosopher to benefit from philosophical thinking. Philosophy is for everyone who thinks and questions and seeks to understand. It's part of the human heritage, tools and insights accumulated over millennia, available to anyone who wishes to engage them. The concepts we've explored tonight, from dualism to the prisoner's dilemma, from the cogito to the absurd, from the trolley problem to quantum superposition, these are your inheritance as a thinking being. They're attempts by countless people across cultures and centuries to make sense of existence. Some will resonate with you immediately. Others may seem strange or irrelevant. That's fine. Take what's useful. Return to the rest later. Philosophy meets you where you are. Remember that philosophy is not just about abstract concepts, but about living well. The ancients understood this. They saw philosophy as therapy for the soul, a way of life, not just academic study. Socrates didn't write books, but engaged people in conversation, trying to help them live better through examined beliefs. The Stoics developed practices for flourishing amid difficulty. The Epicureans sought to reduce anxiety and increase pleasure through philosophical understanding. This practical dimension of philosophy has been recovered in recent decades. Philosophical counseling applies philosophical ideas to personal problems. Philosophy for children teaches critical thinking from young ages. Public philosophy brings philosophical ideas to wider audiences. These developments recognize that philosophy belongs to everyone, addressing universal human concerns. As you drift deeper into rest, perhaps you'll dream philosophical dreams. Dreams where you fly, defying physical law, prompting questions about possibility and necessity. Dreams where people shift identities, raising puzzles about personal identity. Dreams where impossible things happen, challenging your understanding of reality. Dreams have their own strange logic, not quite rational, yet not quite random. Perhaps reflecting something about consciousness itself, or perhaps your sleep will be dreamless, that mysterious state where you exist yet experience nothing, where time passes yet you're unaware, where you are yet are not. Dreamless sleep is itself philosophically puzzling. What are you during those hours? Your body exists, your brain functions, but is there still a you when consciousness vanishes completely? These questions have no easy answers, but they show how philosophy arises from the most ordinary experiences. When you wake, the world will still be here, still puzzling, still wonderful. You'll face choices requiring ethical reasoning. You'll have experiences raising metaphysical questions. You'll form beliefs requiring epistemological justification. Philosophy will be available, not as dogma dictating answers, but as a set of tools and traditions for thinking carefully about what matters. The examined life is not achieved once, but lived continuously. Each day presents opportunities for philosophical reflection. Each choice involves values. Each belief rests on assumptions. Each experience reveals something about consciousness and reality. Philosophy helps you notice these dimensions of life and think about them clearly. As sleep approaches, let go of the need to understand everything. Philosophy teaches that mystery persists, that some questions may have no answers, that uncertainty is unavoidable. This isn't defeat, but realism. We're finite beings trying to comprehend reality that may be infinite. We should pursue understanding without expecting to achieve complete understanding. Yet the pursuit itself has value. Seeking truth, even if never fully reaching it, is worthwhile. Questioning, even without definitive answers, is meaningful. Wondering, even amid uncertainty, is essentially human. These activities define us as the kind of creatures we are, conscious and reflective, able to ask why. So rest now, knowing that you participate in an ancient human endeavor. Your questions connect you to philosophers across history. Your uncertainty is shared by the greatest minds. Your wonder makes you human. Philosophy is always available, patient and inexhaustible, waiting for your return. The concepts we've explored tonight are doorways, each opening onto vast territories of thought. Walk through any door and you'll find endless rooms to explore, questions branching into further questions, ideas connecting to other ideas. Philosophy is not a destination, but a journey, not a conclusion, but a conversation, not a final answer, but an ongoing inquiry. Sleep well, philosophical traveler. Dream deeply, rest fully, and know that when you wake, the questions will be waiting, as they've waited for millennia, as they'll wait for millennia to come. Questions that make us human, that drive us to understand, that connect us across time and space in the shared project of making sense of existence. Let these 100 concepts settle into your mind like stones, dropping into still water, creating ripples that spread and intersect, patterns of thought and question, wonder and uncertainty, knowledge and mystery. Philosophy is all of this, the love of wisdom that defines us as the questioning creatures we are. And now, rest. Let philosophy cradle you into sleep, thoughts dissolving into dreams, consciousness fading into the mystery of sleep, you existing yet not existing, here yet not here, held in the embrace of questions that have no final answers but infinite depth. Philosophy is your companion, now and always, in waking and in sleep, in certainty and in doubt, in knowledge and in wonder. Rest now in this ancient wisdom, this eternal questioning, this very human endeavor to understand ourselves and our world. Sleep well.